third, setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen. Izzo dying for a moving screen.
It's that dreaded moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn of The Athletic, here with Dylan Burkhart, Hoops. Dylan, how we doing, bud?
Hanging in there. It's quite a day, huh?
1 o'clock on Tuesday. I think we're doing this both as a distraction and as a public service for anyone sitting around on election day waiting for this thing to go one way or another. Hope people are looking to turn off the TV. Maybe listen to some hoops.
Talk some hoops. Yeah,
talk some hoops.
That's why we're here.
That's what we're gonna do. And if you'd like,
we're too nervous to do anything else.
Two guys just looking to talk some basketball. Additionally, if you would like to maybe unplug from Twitter or do anything else and want to get some reading in, I highly recommend checking out Hoops. Subscribe to Dylan's site. Has breakdowns of everything that we're about to talk about on this episode. It's a phenomenal resource. So if you are a Michigan fan and you are not subscribed, you are comically uninformed. And in addition, subscribe to The Athletic. Not only my content, but also hundreds of other writers. We have Detroit covered, and my golf coverage is going to be wrapping up next week at the Masters, and then I'll be switching back full-time to basketball. So all kinds of good stuff there. So subscribe today to both. If you haven't, support this podcast by doing so. You got anything to add there?
No, are you like tapping your microphone to add dramatic effect? Are you like tapping the table over there? It's a nice twist.
I might have a couple nervous ticks.
But no, I do suggest everyone.
Thanks for pointing out my angst, Dylan.
Well, everyone else is hearing it on their headphones, so let's nip that in the bud while we have a chance, right?
Sorry, people. Okay, let's get into it. So big stuff happening for Michigan. This is a UM-centric episode with all that going on. So apologies to the MSU folks out there, but big Friday for the program. Chaundee Brown gaining eligibility from the NCAA for immediate playing in 2020-21, and probably the best commitment of Juwan Howard's short tenure at Michigan, landing a commitment from five-star wing Caleb Houstan.
Yeah, it was a year ago we were doing a podcast about Juwan Howard's other first five-star commitment. So, as you said earlier, time is a flat circle, but here we are again. But quite a busy news day. Two of the biggest stories of the offseason happened Friday evening before the Michigan State football game, which is great for guys like you and me that are just trying to cover hoops. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. Not ideal, but that's all right. We're going to start with Chaundee Brown. This immediate impact for this year's Michigan team. I think it does raise the ceiling for this group. I think it is an addition that will probably go beyond stats. You know, you're not just plugging in, oh, well, he can average, 12 and 6.5, right? And add that to the total. I think he brings a lot more than that. So how would you kind of summarize the difference that he brings to whether it's expectations that you might have for this year's group or just kind of the roster itself?
Yeah, to me, the immediate impact of Chaundee being eligible is that Michigan has a lot more margin for error. He solidifies Michigan's floor, especially with COVID and everything else. You're going to play games without players this year, whether it's injury or anything. And without Chaundee Brown, Michigan's backup wings were Adrian Nunez and Terrence Williams, and we have no idea if either is capable of playing rotational minutes over the course of the Big Ten season at a level that everyone would kind of want from this team. So that's the first thing, right? You have a guy who's a proven high major player. He started 3 years in the ACC, plug and play. He has production. I think that level of safety is great. I think the harder thing is figuring out what happens to the ceiling, because he's very similar. I mean, he said this yesterday when we talked to him. He's a very similar player to Franz Wagner and Isaiah Livers, not in the sense that they do the same things on the court, but their best positions are all sort of around the same spot on the floor. Mm-hmm. And you can't really put three guys in the same position. I mean, you can try, but that's interesting. And for me, the other thing is I don't know if he answers either of the two biggest questions I have about Michigan, but I think he gives a lot more upside if those questions are answered properly. So he doesn't fix the questions at point guard or center, but if those questions are answered, all of a sudden this Michigan team can be really good, not just pretty good, I'd say. So that's where I start with it.
And I kind of, when I look at the wings for Michigan, I kind of just throw out basic ideas of position labels and things like that, because there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching, and it's not really going to translate to maybe traditional norms that people think of in terms of shooting guard, small forward, power forward. Like, it just doesn't really apply with this collection of guys. Like, Chaundee's a dude who can, kind of look like a traditional three on the other end, but the fact that he can guard an opposing four means that, you probably can put him out there with, maybe those other two guys at times and things like that. There's going to be versatility because those three guys are all completely different. You think of Franz as kind of a shot creator, shot maker, a guy who's going to have the ball in his hands, a guy who's going to initiate a lot of offense. You think of Isaiah Livers as more of a standstill, kind of set your feet, shoot until he proves otherwise, right? That's kind of his label. And then Chaundee's this kind of weird hybrid kind of power player who can, catch and drive, right? And attack the rim and play in the mid-range a little bit and do these things. So, like, I don't feel like they overlap enough where there are things that would clutter the rotation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's fair. I think the question is, they all are guys who are more comfortable from everything we've seen. And for Chaundee, that's 3 years. For Franz, that's 1. For Isaiah, that's 3 years. They're all more comfortable playing off the ball than on the ball. They would be, if you could put those three guys next to Xavier Simpson, you'd have a hell of a team. I think the big question is who can create shots for other people, who can pass the ball, who can distribute. Maybe that's Eli Brooks, maybe that's Mike Smith. I'm not sure, but it's not going to be Chaundee Brown.
Right.
You mentioned Franz Wagner. Again, he could show some of that. He hasn't shown that at a Big Ten level, right? He's shown that he can get his own shot. He's not going to. He might, but he has not proven to any real extent that he can be a focal point of offense and pick out Isaiah Livers in the corner or find someone dive into the rim or like see the whole court, right? He's very much a guy who is an elite finisher, can face up and drive and do all these things. But until Michigan finds who's going to be that creator, I think that's still the big question. The good thing is you have really good options on the wing. So maybe everyone is just sort of a half-ass creator, but you get there because you have so many other threats, right? You don't have anyone that you can really cheat off of or anything like that. So you don't need maybe that. It's going to be by committee, so to speak, right?
Like some of my projections are in coming kind of with the belief that I do think Wagner is going to take steps in that department of. Yeah, last year I feel like he was kind of had tunnel vision of put the ball in the basket, whether you're shooting, whether you're catching, driving, and kind of doing his, draw contact or do whatever. He was, I think, pretty single-minded in that. I think with a year of college basketball under his belt and with his skill set and with his eyes on the pros and understanding what his game probably needs to look like, I think you will see maybe his head up a little bit more when he drives, right? And actually looking for guys because, just kind of the maturation of a basketball player.
Yep. I guess my one caution would be, so like assist rate is a stat that measures percentage of assists that you create when you're on the court of your teammates' made baskets, right? So for comparison, like usually a 20% assist rate is a good assist rate. Xavier Simpson was up over 40% last year, which was 5th best in the country. Franz Wagner, 5.9%. Isaiah Livers, 6.4%. Eli Brooks, 10.9%.
Right.
And Chaundee Brown was at 10.8%. So those guys all have a long way to go before being sort of an average passer, right? So that is, I think, just the scariest part of when you look at that setup. And again, those numbers were artificially deflated by Xavier Simpson being one of the best passers in the country, right? Xavier Simpson always had the ball, but you're going to have to figure out a way to kind of make all that work. And I think the good thing about Eli Brooks potentially at point guard is that he'll be a ball mover, not a ball dribbler, right? He's not gonna be dominating the ball. So I think that could help with sort of this versatile, interchangeable set of wings that Michigan has.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of be interested to see that. I think I said it to you yesterday when we were chatting. If it's Eli as kind of your primary, he does have a tendency sometimes to pound the ball. And if you've got guys who need to operate off of someone creating them a shot, and Eli kind of falls into those tendencies sometimes of over dribbling, right, and overplaying things, things could look pretty stagnant at times. That's where I think a lot of it falls on Franz needing to take a step forward as a guy who you can put the ball in his hands and let him create and not be, like I said, single-minded. Yeah,
and I think just Franz Wagner is going to be a sophomore. That's when you make a leap. It's a lot different than saying, okay, Isaiah Livers and Chaundee Brown, you're seniors now. You're going to go and play make in a way that you never have before, right? Like they've played a lot of games and they haven't done that, and there's probably a reason for that. Where do you think Chaundee's best spot is in the rotation based on how Michigan sets up? Do you think he should start? Do you think he should come off the bench? What lineup do you kind of see as optimal based on what we know right now?
I mean, it's hard not to, especially in a year like this where, there hasn't been a full off season of prep time and stuff like that, and not having any idea what Mike Smith is. My tendency is just you play your 5 best guys. And that means Franz probably playing more too, in my book, alongside Eli at the 1. And then basically interchangeable wings in Livers and Chaundee Brown with, Hunter Dickinson at the 5 spot being spelled probably frequently by Austin Davis.
Yeah, I get that logic. My problem with that as a starting lineup is you're taking Eli Brooks is a natural 2, Franz is a natural 3. You're all sliding them to positions that they're probably not going to be as comfortable in. And I think it's sort of semantics because everyone's going to have to play some of those roles as the season goes on, right? When Mike Smith's on the court, Eli will go back to 2 regardless. But I think if you can start Mike Smith and bring Chaundee off the bench, the rotation almost sets up nicer because Chaundee can replace anyone on the floor and you can just grab and go. If you start all 3 wings and Franz Wagner gets 2 fouls before the 15-minute timeout, you have to bring in Brandon and play completely different, or you have to bring in Mike Smith. You just have to move things around more.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I would hope if I were Michigan staff that Brandon Johns can take enough of a step. First of all, in a perfect world for Michigan, Brandon Johns is crushing it in preseason workouts right now and forcing you to start him at the 4, right? We don't know if that's happening, but
how is that possible? There's no way he's going to start over Isaiah Livers.
No, I'm still keeping Franz at the 2.
Okay.
In this scenario.
And Livers at the 3?
And Livers at the 3. Yeah. So, but I think I'm going to probably go with the guy who's played over 80 games in the ACC and proven himself for 3 years. Chaundee Brown, probably a more known commodity. But with the Mike Smith thing, from what I've heard from how plenty of workouts have gone, they think that he might be a guy who is better served playing off the ball too. So now you're still got Eli at the 1.
See, yeah, I know everyone loves talking. Mike Smith can shoot. Mike Smith can play off the ball. Mike Smith's the only one who's shown any sort of playmaking ability in his career, even at a lower level. So if Eli Brooks is good enough that you want to play him at the 1, I think that would be a huge testament to his growth, right? Like, there's nothing he's shown that makes me think, oh, Eli Brooks needs to be this team's point guard. You agree with that?
Well, yeah, but Mike Smith has just spent 3 years playing in the Ivy League.
But if Mike Smith is going to play, he needs to play point guard because that allows everyone else to do what they're best at.
But what is the best case scenario for everyone else? If it's not what he's capable of doing, then that doesn't translate.
So I guess if you're going to say that Mike Smith can't play in the Big Ten, then it doesn't matter where he plays.
Sure, that's true.
Right? So if he can play, he's going to be doing what – like, he's not going to be – he needs to be able to do some of that. Otherwise, his value is not really there. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Right.
Obviously, the ability to make shots important, and when other guys – like, that was something that Michigan clearly lacked last year from the point guard spot, where if you go into a flow offense and the point guard goes off the ball, you lose your spacing. That won't be a problem with Mike Smith. He's a good shooter. I get all that. But so I don't know. I think that's all semantics. But either way.
What's your answer to your question to me on Chaundee Brown's kind of perfect role rotation-wise?
I think he should be the sixth man for Michigan to start the season because I think that makes the rotation work. And I think he plays third or fourth most minutes on the team, though. He's in your closing lineup. So I don't think it really matters. I just think it
that's fair.
Works out more smoothly. I still think that you need a playmaker, though, and that's not Chaundee. That's not his game, right? We haven't seen that. He mentioned wanting to work on his ball handling and his playmaking as something that he's really focused on. But for me, I buy a lot more into the fact that he has untapped shooting upside. I know he mentioned that, and I kind of buy into that. He's a guy who shot 80+% from the free throw line every year. He played in a shitty offense that didn't prioritize shooting threes. He made over 40% of his mid-range jumpers. All of those things tell me if you put him in an offense and tell him stand 4 feet further back and then shoot when you're open, I think he probably has the potential there. So I buy into that a little more than him actually emerging as a playmaker.
I mean, I made the point in the piece I wrote for today, and would be curious your opinion of it. Like, I feel like it's kind of hard to project a lot of what he can do for this team, and it's in part because he was surrounded by the talent gap between what he had around him versus the majority of Wake Forest's opponents was so dramatic. They won back-to-back ACC games once in the 3 years that he was there. Like, they were not even remotely competitive. So, you know, if what was being asked of him, we don't really know, right? And what was his level of confidence in his teammates, right? To maybe make certain passes or maybe even try to do certain things.
Yeah, it's funny because there were good players on those teams. I think a bigger problem was like coaching, right? There's a reason, like Danny Manning got some dudes in there. Olivier Sarr is going to be starting at center for Kentucky. Chaundee Brown could be starting at Michigan. Like, obviously they had talent, but it was really probably trust in the system and trust in that what they're doing doesn't really work. And this last year, it was probably trust in his leg. I mean, he had multiple injuries, missed time, and tore up his calf and was clearly playing hurt. I remember watching him play defense like in film last year, and I was like, how is this guy going to guard all these positions everyone's talking about? But if you go back and watch the year before, he looks like a different player. So I think that's notable. I think it's interesting that they always had sort of a ball-dominant guard next to him. Like, his coaching staff never really put him in a position to do a lot of that stuff. So there weren't, like, Brandon Childress was a good player on that last year's team. I mean, it's not like he was terrible. So it makes sense that the 6-foot guard was going to take a lot of shots. I'm just not sure where he really or how he really fits in a different system, because it's just not – it's not fun watching those Wake Forest games by any means. They don't look like a well-coached team. They don't look like a well-drilled offense. So that's where I think you get a lot of the upside of, in a new system, he could look a lot better.
Fair. I think we started this off with me saying I think that this notably raises the ceiling for this team. Do you agree with that?
I don't see.
I'm not saying like they're going from, maybe a second round NCAA tournament team to the Elite Eight or the Final Four, but I'm just saying, like, I think it might be getting undersold a little bit, how much better he can make them.
Yeah, he's a guy who does so many things that he's going to make a positive impact, right? And I think he's that caliber of player. How much he raises the ceiling, I don't know. I still think you're looking at like Franz Wagner being a bona fide lottery pick, and then that's going to really raise this team's ceiling. Either way, it's just makes Michigan a much more kind of solid team across the board. It's kind of like his game, right? Like there's not one thing that stands out about what he does, is that he does a little bit of all of these things, and that's a really easy guy to fit into a rotation, especially with all the other uncertainty around him.
Yeah. What else you got on Mr. Brown coming to town?
I think it's a fascinating dynamic of how old Michigan is, but also how they've never really played together. You have these like 22-year-old, 23-year-old guys like joining up on a team. It's just different for what you think of in college basketball, especially the year after you lose the two winningest players in program history. And then all of a sudden you have another team that could start 4 seniors, right? Potentially. So I don't know. That'll be interesting just to see how it works out. I did the math, and I think Chaundee and Mike Smith won like 25 or 33 games total during the 3 years that they played at their schools. Michigan won 27 and a half games a year during that time. So it's a very different set of expectations. Just everything's different about that. I'm sure it feels great to just be a part of it, but what does that mean when shit gets real and you're in the middle of it? Like you haven't been in those situations in the way that Michigan's last few teams have. So that'll be interesting. I don't know how that plays out.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good thing for Michigan for sure. You got, these guys who are thirsty. I think it adds to buy-in on the importance of winning games. It's really hard to go that many years losing. Because when you get into the grad transfers and transfers in general, like you don't know guys' agendas. If people are just going, this is my last shot, I got to get mine and blah, 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 that can have a ill effect in ways. I don't think you're going to run into much of that with these guys if they're able to start winning games and kind of get positive vibes going. So, yeah, I'd be really curious. And just curious to see, I mean, Chaundee Brown scored 24 points against Duke last year, even though he was beat up late in the season. What if they want, how much of him is going to be a piece versus a focal point for, the coaching staff of getting, kind of getting what they can out of him.
Yeah. My initial reaction would be a piece, but
me too.
I don't know. I mean,
but if he goes out and starts doing stuff, then, plans can change.
I would say he's a piece who can be a focal point through like every 3 or 4 games, right? I mean, he'll have games where he has that upside that maybe you don't have from other guys who you just think of as a piece.
Right. I like for Michigan what his addition does in terms of options in games. And it, just whatever matchups you run into, right? Whether you need to react to something or you want to create a mismatch, having a guy like him just suddenly kind of join what you already has, I feel like it unlocks a lot of doors. And just gives you these options that, coaches just die for when you're not just kind of pigeonholed into certain looks and certain capabilities.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that from how Michigan played last year and all the issues when both Franz and Isaiah were out and there was just no other option on the wing. They played that 3-point guard lineup all the time, and it was basically rarely worked effectively. They would try to play 2 bigs. Having another wing who can play all those spots just gives you so much more cover and versatility. If you want to go small, if you want to go big, you can do all that, and he fits pretty comfortably in any of those spots, I'd say. like to me, his game, and I know Max talked to one of his coaches at Wake, and he said they were best when he was a small ball 4. Obviously, that's not great for Michigan, who's sort of just bursting at the seams with small ball 4s. But I think that does kind of speak to his game and fit and where he's best. But I do think he's probably more capable of sliding down than maybe Isaiah Livers is, just with he's a little more versatile defensively. But the other thing his coach said that kind of stood with me is if Chaundee Brown's your 3rd or 4th best player, you have a really good team. And I think that's kind of where Michigan's at, where if he's your best player, you're probably going to be asking him to do too much. But in his spot, in his role in this team, is probably a perfect fit.
Yeah, I agree. Caleb Houstan?
Yeah, let's flip over to that.
Let's get into it. Obviously, huge get. I think it elevates all, not only aspects of this class, but aspects of, it is payoff for this was what Juwan Howard was hired for, right? It's to recruit at this level. It is to get guys like this, and he got the job done, on this one. And he was made a priority the second he reclassed, and they closed. Big boost to the class, great talent. We'll get into his game, but what did you kind of think of what it just means for Michigan to get, right, a legit top 10 guy, a legit 5-star, and what comes with that? Yeah,
so for me, it really speaks to how much Juwan learned about recruiting and sort of roster construction and just priorities in his second class, right? It speaks to how kind of ass backwards the approach was in the first class to just go out and try to get all these 5-stars first and then fill in the pieces from there. That was definitely the approach in 2020. Sort of backfired all there at the end in April, and everything sort of collapsed. Obviously, still got good players, but it wasn't kind of what he expected. Since then, I think they've taken they went from a top-down approach to a bottom-up approach. Mm-hmm. They went out and got guys like Will Cheddar. They got guys like Isaiah Barnes, guys that are going to be Big Ten players, but maybe aren't going to set the world on fire. They filled those positional needs to the point where when they miss out on Harrison Ingram, it's not the end of the class, right? It just, he would have been a nice piece. And then you finally land Caleb Houstan, and you have a 5-man class that's ranked number 1 in the country, right? It speaks to you have to do that work with landing guys like Frankie Collins and Kobe Buffkin and getting those guys in the picture beforehand, because then you have kind of that base to the program. And now all of a sudden the class makes a lot of sense. You're not just kind of selling hope to that initial 5-star. You're saying, look, with you, we'll be the best class in the country. We have all these guys. Mm-hmm. We have this role for you to play within that group. I think that just really speaks to the tear that Juwan's been on this whole summer, right? I mean, It felt like in April, his whole recruiting, everything was just kind of a house of cards that fell apart in 24 hours when that Josh Christopher and Isaiah Todd news hit 1-2. Yeah. Since then, he's just been landing every recruit. He basically has gone at, not every recruit, but he's landed 5 2021 recruits, 2 transfers, just really created momentum while sitting at home on Zoom calls, right? It speaks to I guess his raw recruiting ability at this point, but a much better strategy and well thought out, I'd say.
All right, so let's get into his game. You've obviously watched a lot of tape, broken it down.
You have some player comps over there from his coaches in Montverde too, right?
From coaches all over the place, including down the road in Ann Arbor. But, I mean, I love his game. I think to talk to anybody who has seen him play, and like this includes, I talked to like an NBA scout on Saturday, who was, just talking about how much he's already been on his team's radar and blah, blah, blah. Like, this is a guy that projects to a extremely high ceiling, and especially kind of in like the modern fit of basketball.
Mm-hmm. He Yeah, I've heard people say, "Oh, you shouldn't think of him as a one and done because he's not that athletic." I think that's sort of like 20 years ago talking. If you're 6'8" and can shoot like he can shoot, and just really have the feel for the game offensively, I think like just looking at Duncan Robinson right now kind of proves just how much that ability is what the NBA wants. If you're announcing your college commitment through Jonathan Givony, you're probably pretty focused on the NBA as well, I would say. So either way, I would not really rule that out, despite the fact that he's not going to be winning dunk contests or anything like that. But yeah, his game is all about his shot. He can shoot on the move. He can shoot off the dribble, off the catch, and he's tall enough to basically shoot over people on the wing. Feels kind of like a perfect replacement for Isaiah Livers for me as far as roster construction. I mean, that's his ideal role, I'd say. Yep. But he has a lot of potential probably as more of a three down the road. Maybe he's just Isaiah Livers was a shell of what he is now.
Right.
When he was this age. Houston's probably closer to what Isaiah Livers is now as far as like how advanced his game is.
I see that. Like, and even still, like, I don't, and maybe it's just, I don't, maybe the memory isn't there and I'm wrong on this, but like, I don't really even think of like Isaiah Livers as the, catch, pump, one dribble, step over, hit the shot, or step in shooter and things like that. Like talking to Kevin Boyle, the coach at Montverde, who's coached like just a million pros and knows what he's talking about. Like he just wouldn't shut up about the variety of shots that this kid can hit. And it's stepping to his left, it's stepping to his right, it's stepping into a shot. He just has all these things. And this is why the NBA is already well aware of him. It's just stuff that doesn't come naturally to your traditional good shooter, right? Who is set your feet at the arc and shoot. That's not him. He's a shot taker and maker, not just a shooter.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this when we did a pod about Max Christie, and it's rare to find people in high school or EYBL or any of that who actually shoot well. Like there's a lot of guys who shoot a lot, and because they shoot a lot, you assume they're good shooters. But I mean, Houston's a legit, like he makes shots at a young age when players just don't. I mean, I think he shot over 50% from three last year in high school. Obviously he's playing with some of the best players in the world that could have already probably been in the NBA, and they're playing against other high schools, whatever. But I think it'll be really fascinating to see him play this year without Scotty Barnes and Cade Cunningham. He'll have to show more of that playmaking ability. Right now, when he uses the ball screen, he can dribble off of it and pull up and make shots, but he's not really seeing the floor and whipping passes everywhere. And I think he has that potential. But yeah, it's just to get an offensive skilled player of that size and caliber who, if you're ranked 8th in the country and everyone's pointing out how you're not a good athlete, what does that say about how skilled you are offensively?
Sure. Something on that Boyle said that I found interesting was when I asked him, hey, what about his ability to play out of ball screens and kind of be this guy? And he goes, he's working on it, and it's something that obviously is brought up a lot. But forcing a guy to maybe do something that isn't in his best interest can also not really serve a greater purpose, right? There's a difference between a guy who can get a screen and understand the intricacies of playing over the screen and what the defender is going to have to do, and being able to create their own shot, or make a reasonable next pass, because you have to go, defenders have to go over the top on him so you can create spacing mismatches and all this stuff. There's a difference between that guy and someone who is actually dribbling into a ball screen and creating off of it, right? And maybe looking to drive a lane and make a play and do all these things. Like, that's probably not going to be Caleb Houstan. And if they're going to try to, if you push a guy to do that, right, or if a guy pushes himself to do something that maybe is not actually in his best interest, it can almost defeat the purpose of who you are. It sounded to me like they're trying to just talk to Houstan about, dude, if you just be who you are, you're fine. Like it'll be all good. Like you don't need to suddenly be, putting the ball on the deck and doing all this stuff like that. If that's not you, that's okay. And I think it's important for fans to kind of look at it that way too. Maybe it made a lot of sense the way when he kind of spelled it out that way.
Yeah, look at someone like Klay Thompson. He can dribble.
That was an example.
Like 45 points and dribble twice. Like
exactly.
That's an elite skill. And that if you have an offense that's set up properly and you have the playmaking around you, that's just going to make everyone so much better. I mean, it's the same reason Isaiah Livers hasn't turned into a playmaker. It's because, they had that. They needed someone to hit threes from the wing, right? I think that's a great point, and it really speaks to the idea. It's kind of the idea of like a specialist versus someone who can do a bit of everything, right? He has an elite skill that you can't teach. It's a really elite skill to fit into an offense also because it can go anywhere, and you need shooting in any offensive structure, and that's just going to make him that it's easy to draw out his role as a freshman because take a guy like, I don't know, Josh Christopher. For him to be at his best, he needs the ball all the time. You need to play through him all the time. You can't play him off the ball. He's not a good enough shooter. He's going to have games where he scores 40 points, but you're going to just have to run things through him, right? Because that's any sort of dominant guard. That's what you need to do. Houstan or Isaiah Todd would have been the same deal, right? He's a guy you need to put the ball in his hands because that's where his elite skill. Houstan, you don't need to do that. You can play him off the ball, and he can still be lethally efficient, productive. It's just so much easier to draw a path to a successful freshman season when you already play a role that works in college. So many guys in high school don't play that role because they play sort of that best player on a team role. They have to do everything. They don't really specialize in one area that they can really stand out in.
Yeah.
Houstan, it's easy to see that fit.
And it'll be interesting because he's going to kind of be the focal point at Montverde this year. And what does that look like? Obviously, there's still going to be plenty of talent around him. They just bring in more D1 guys, right? But in terms of opposing defenses, he's the mark, right? So he's going to be get the majority of the attention defensively. Whereas if you're playing Montverde last year, like you couldn't possibly even worry about a guy like him because you're just getting bombed right from all these different directions with Cade, with Barnes, with Moses Moody, like there was just one after another. And then it allows you to have a guy who's this good just standing there, right? Just being like, I'm a bucket, give me the ball when you need me to.
No one shoots 52% from three by accident, right? Like he won't shoot 52% from three this year because it's just impossible to do if you're it's filthy to have a guy like him as the fourth option on a team, right? They have a big man, I think, going to UNC. That team had two point guards. So Scotty Barnes and Cade Cunningham are both on the Kuzi watch list. So, and it was one high school team had two potentially of the best freshman point guards in the country this year. It's crazy.
And then a third going to Michigan.
Yeah, if you're wondering why Zeb Jackson didn't play, there were two Kuzi nominees on that team in high school. So I also think it's interesting to see how it kind of all came together. Obviously, Michigan was on a bunch of other point guards at different times. Jalen Warley, Harrison Ingram, they were all kind of not total point guards, but guys you'd have to put the ball in their hands. Having a guy like Frankie Collins as your focal point, I think actually works really well with Caleb Houstan because Collins is a guy who's going to have the ball, but he's just also a guy who can kind of distribute to a player like that, and they would play off each other well. If you were to try to put Ingram and Collins together, that would have been kind of a messy match because they both need the ball, right? They're both best at passing. So I like that fit a lot too.
I mean, what do you think about next year's roster when I think it's 10 of 13 guys are going to be freshmen or sophomores, most likely? Maybe you get another guy to stick around, whether it be, like Chaundee Brown, I believe, will be eligible for another season. Is that right?
So everyone is eligible
granting a year
to come back for a year.
Right.
Right. So Mike Smith, Chaundee Brown, Austin Davis, Eli Brooks, Isaiah Livers, if they wanted to, from what I understand, they could come back next year and it wouldn't count against the scholarship limit.
Yeah. Which is crazy. I don't know how plausible that is really for
I can't really see it being a popular option with players at this level, but maybe I'm naive. I don't know. If there's a season and an NCAA tournament, I just can't really see guys being like, all right, well, let's just put life on pause for another year and I'm going to come back.
Agreed.
I don't know. It just doesn't seem that.
Like you could get a case like a guy like Austin Davis, if he wants to get a grad school degree, whatever, like, yeah, maybe.
He's already in grad school. I mean, but yeah, he could get another year for
sure.
Yes.
Right. But like, yeah, like a guy like Chaundee Brown, I don't see. A guy like Mike Smith, I don't really see that being, like you said, an option that'll be very popular.
And we talked to Eli, and he said he hadn't considered it at all.
Right.
And he was talking about like journaling about his senior year and remembering the moments and stuff. He didn't really seem like a guy who was like, yeah, I'm probably going to come back next year. I mean, anything can happen. But
anything can happen with, who knows what is going on with playing options, at the end of this year. Hopefully everyone has every option possible, but we don't know. But to my point, right, 10 of 13 guys are going to be freshmen or sophomores. Like there's just open space everywhere for whoever can play, right, to get minutes. What do you think? Yeah,
so we've only seen, potentially Franz Wagner goes to the NBA. The only players on that 21-22 roster we've ever seen play are Brandon Johns and Adrian Nunez play in college. So it's just a complete free-for-all, really. And that also makes it a lot easier to recruit in a lot of ways because you can be like, look, it's wide open. And it's really easy to recruit over the kids you just recruited because they haven't played yet. So that helps, I think, with a lot of these schools that recruit a lot of one-and-dones too. Whereas when you get guys like Isaiah Livers or Xavier Simpson who are there for 4 years, they're like, well, you got your point guard. He's not going anywhere. So that's a bit of a phenomenon there. It's going to be an extremely young team. I think you probably bring in at least one transfer. But I don't know. There's going to be talent. Michigan's been recruiting at a level that's going to stand out in the Big Ten. It'll be it's just so funny because we're talking about how Juwan's going to mesh these old guys from all different places together this year, and then he's going to have a team of 18-year-olds the following season. So he's getting the full experience there. And it's going to take a level of coaching that is needs to be really high. Right now, because of you have old guys. Like this has been it's been said to me that in their workouts right now, like they're going really fast on installing stuff, right? Going through things, like everything gets picked up pretty quickly. You don't need to worry about, holding Terrence Williams' hands through it. Like just let Terrence Williams watch and basically try to keep up, right? And he'll figure it out. But when you got all these dudes, like, even some of your middle of the road guys, like Brandon Johns and Adrian Nunez, they have spent 2 years playing college basketball and they're out there at practice. So other than like really Hunter Dickinson's really the only one that you need to like kind of make sure is really following along. You know what I mean? Like in a practice right now, like they're going really fast with all that stuff. Well, next year it will just be the absolute complete opposite. It'll be dialing everything back and simplifying and doing whatever you need to do. But it's going to take really good coaching. Yeah, you're not going to have any guards back. Like that's really what you're looking at. Maybe Zev Jackson plays more than we think, and that helps that transition. But that's it, man. Like you're going to be trying to get Frankie Collins, Kobe Buffkin, Isaiah Barnes, Houstan, all these guys ready to go. They're going to need to play minutes, and that's tough. But I guess you'd rather do it with top 100 kids than without them. So it's a different challenge. I don't think you haven't seen Brandon Johns or Adrian Nunez show that they're going to really be the leaders that kind of hold that whole thing together from what they do on the court or anything like that. So it's tough. If Franz Wagner's back, it's a different situation.
Obviously. But I would put that percentage at about 3%. So when you look at the class, the only thing notably missing that you'd say is a big. Everyone knows that. Can you kind of touch on some of the options that they're considering there?
Yeah, so Houston's teammate, Charles Bediako, is still on the radar. He's a top 30 kid, played for the same AU program, but most people think he's probably going to commit to Alabama sooner than later. They've landed basically everyone that played for UPlay Canada other than Caleb Houstan. So that's one to watch. Efton Reed, we've talked about a ton on this pod. He's at IMG. He's from Virginia, played with Hunter and Terrence and with Team Takeover. You hear kind of something different about his recruitment every month, but the three big schools you always hear are Michigan, Ohio State, and Pittsburgh. I think his recruitment will drag on into the spring, but he's one to keep an eye on. Moussa Diabate, sort of a mystery man of the class. He's a French big man who plays for the same AAU program that Jet Howard, Isaiah Todd, and actually Chaundee Brown under a different label played for. So there's some connections there. He also is at IMG playing with Jet Howard. He's a monster. He played really well on ESPN recently with IMG. I kind of assume he'll end up at Kentucky or in the G League or something like that, but he's one that's never really spoken about recruiting ever.
I've been told that a lot of people think that might be down to Kentucky and Michigan.
There you go. So he's one to keep at least an eye on. And he fits probably as well as any of those bigs with Hunter, I would say. I think you would want to get more of a raw rim protecting big who can do some of that stuff when you already have the kind of slower post up big. So that's one to keep an eye on. Kentucky also just got another big man commitment this week, Damian Collins. So he's one to watch. And then I guess you have Chet Holmgren, who's number 2 player in the country, weighs about 110 pounds, but can shoot threes and block every shot imaginable. So he's one to keep an eye on too. Yeah. He's playing an exhibition game in Ann Arbor against Ipsy Prep next month.
Right.
Anything else to add?
I think it's a safe bet that they probably end up getting a dude, A5, and that will take this class to just different heights. It's if that happens, what's happening with this staff and the level of recruiting is going to really be, I think, a story in and of itself. Especially with what's going on at the road, with Michigan and Michigan State both recruiting at these levels and just kind of going back and forth, getting these guys one after another. It's awesome, I think, for obviously our purposes, but but the rivalry, right, and the Big Ten, because frankly, this is different. Because when you look at the Big Ten, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, you don't see that many 5-stars, you don't see that many All-Americans, and you don't see that many potential one-and-dones and blah, blah, blah. And if these two places start continue this trend, they're going to be very different, I think, than the rest of the league.
Yeah, it is interesting because it used to be Ohio State was the one school that would get those guys. Indiana will always get the Indiana kids. I don't really know. I mean, who's really recruiting in third in the Big Ten right now? I don't know that there is. It's like Michigan and Michigan State are way out up ahead by pretty wide margin, I'd say, based on how the last 2 classes have gone. And Illinois has been recruiting well. That's probably is that the team?
Probably. Ohio State still gets guys occasionally, but it's basically Illinois, Indiana, Ohio State are just kind of middling. They take big swings and miss a lot. Michigan State are closing on their big swings.
Yeah, Ohio State recruits in the top 100, but under Thad, there was a point where they would get
no doubt
top 25 guys, right?
Sure.
And that would just be the thing. Right now, Michigan and Michigan State are the only schools really, I think, in that kind of 5-star pool consistently and willing to go into some of those battles, and it's paid off over the last 12 to 24 months, I'd say.
Right.
It's great for the rivalry. If Michigan gets one of those 4 bigs, I think that could keep them at least in the top 3 classes in the country, I'd say. Because obviously Duke and Kentucky are going to skyrocket up. I think it'd be pretty surprising if Michigan kept the number 1 class. Mm-hmm. But I also think Frankie Collins and Kobe Buffkin will probably see their rankings tick upward. Both have played well. this fall. I think they're probably more like top 50 kids than top 75 kids. But yeah, if you can get a big, I mean, that's a great class. And even if you don't get a big, I think you can go to the transfer market, and with what it's going to look like, I think you could find a useful post player to add down the line.
Right. I mean, and they now have, they especially have the luxury of waiting, because you've got so many of these guys early. If you take Franz out of the picture, that leaves you with still 2 open scholarships to play with. Do I have that right?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, you don't have to take anyone if you don't want to, right? Mm-hmm. You're kind of in control.
You don't have to go down the list and try to find someone like last December they went out and got Terrence Williams, right? You don't need a guy like that. You just need to look. If another top 30 kid wants to join up, you can keep recruiting guys like Chet or Jaden Hardy or whoever, even if there's no chance, because you have nothing to lose.
Yes. And then if a bunch of guys want to come, you start saying, "Oh, why is Jace Howard on scholarship?" But that's a different story. All right, you got anything else you want to touch on?
I think that's pretty much it. Quick little pod, and then get back to real life here.
There you go. Very good. Well, we appreciate everyone listening. Make sure you're subscribed to The Athletic and to UM Hoops. Make sure you are tending to and tipping and visiting and really giving as much support as you can to your local bars and restaurants, because who knows what the coming months hold. So while you still can, make sure you are